Thank you for tuning into the Pictures of Lily podcast. I'm your host, Lily Moayeri. I've been a music journalist since 1992, and I interview a lot of music-related people. This podcast is about my experience behind the story, my experience doing the interviews, just to give you a snapshot of what it's like on the other side of the digital recorder.
Pictures of Lily.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning into the Pictures of Lily podcast. This is our 20th episode. As always, thanks to those of you who have subscribed or followed us on any of the podcast platforms. You can find us on every platform by going to picturesoflily.com. From there, you can connect to us on all podcast platforms as well as on SoundCloud, YouTube, and Pandora. In this episode, I am going to be talking about my experience interviewing my first ever music idol, whom I thought lived in the TV when I was a little kid, and not an actual real-life person, Suzi Quatro, whom I spoke to for Under the Radar about her documentary, Suzi Q. Here are a few snapshots of my experience interviewing Suzi Quatro. When I was very young and living in the Middle East, we had variety shows from European countries like Germany broadcast on TV. One of the musicians who showed up often on these shows was Suzi Quatro. Suzi had such a confident attitude and she had so much swagger and she played her bass so ferociously that at my super young age, I wasn't 100% sure if she was a boy or a girl. But she was always around on TV and part of the fabric of our growing up. When I saw her on Happy Days, where she played the character Leather Tuscadero, I was confused and couldn't quite believe it was the same person. Plus, in my head, Suzi Quatro had an English accent, and here she was talking very American. As an adult, I never brought her up to friends and colleagues because so few people who grew up in the US knew who she was. A while back, I went down a Suzi Quatro rabbit hole on YouTube to show Lawrence what a badass she was. Looking through those videos, I realized just how much of an impact she had on me when I was so young, and how strong that impact still is. Also, that she is super sexy, which I didn't realize when I was young. And then this year, Suzi Q, the documentary, was released. It was super emotional for me to watch that documentary. While I knew Suzi Quatro's music, I didn't know anything about her life or what she was like as a person or her background, and this documentary illuminated everything. One of the main takeaways is that she never had a problem with addictions of any kind. I asked her about that, and this is what she said. My mother is my touchstone. My father was a musician, and he instilled in me that attitude of professionalism. I liked their example. It made sense to me. I took what I needed from both relationships. My mother was my moral code 100%, and my dad was my professional attitude. He said, whenever you're on stage, it doesn't matter if it's 10 people or 10,000 people. What you have to remember is every person in that audience took money out of their pocket and paid for a ticket to see you. You have an obligation. It went like an arrow of truth into me, and I kept it my whole life. This is also why the documentary doesn't have sex or drugs in it, just rock and roll. Suzi Quatro is completely sensible. Considering it was the mid-60s through to the early 70s and she was a young teenager when she was starting in the music business, as you can imagine, there were barriers for women as well as sexual harassment. Suzi recognized both of these things straight away. I asked her how she avoided being Me Too'd, and this is what she told me. I'm going to clarify this because it's my personal mantra and I've lived by it. I've been with guys all the time. One of the guys, a tomboy, I can tell a dirty joke. But, and this is what I teach females, and if you don't do this, you're an idiot. I keep my female card in my back pocket. It's there all the time. If I'm with somebody and they step over that personal line of my sensibilities, the card comes out and then I'm a woman and I use it at that point. I don't have to be butch and cheap and tawdry and be undressed to be strong. I will play the game up to the point where it goes on my territory. This is what I try and teach women. Guidelines. There are certain no-brainers in life. I've watched girls in this business and I've had to have words with them sometimes. Famous people that I don't want to mention. What are you doing? Be proud of who you are. You don't need to compromise. You don't need to be that skanky. You don't need to do that. I've said that I don't know how many times in my life.
All my life I wanted to be somebody, and here I am. I know what I got, and there ain't nobody gonna take it away from me. So let me tell you what I am. I'm a red hot fox, I can take the knocks. I'm a hammer from hell, honey, can't you tell? I'm the wild one. Yes, I'm the wild one.
I related to Suzi Quatro a lot when I watched the documentary, and I related to her even more during our interview. And she even told me I had a Suzi Quatro vibe, which to me is pretty much the biggest compliment in the world. Suzi Quatro is 70 years old. She looks just as amazing as she did when she was 20, and she plays the bass just as ferociously. And last year, she was on tour with her latest album, No Control, which she co-wrote with her son. If you check out her Facebook or YouTube, she has bassline tutorials and stripped-down sessions. She's never going to stop, and she's never going to spin out of control either. She has a room at the top of her house that she calls the ego room, which I had heard about, so I asked her about it, and this is what she said. It's the most peaceful room in the entire house. Every available space is covered with pictures of me. You've got CDs, you've got scrapbooks, you've got videos, guitars, all my leather suits. Everywhere you look is Suzi Quatro. I go up there to watch a video, to do some research. Whatever I go up there for, when I come out of that ego room, I shut the door. I don't need to be the rock star off the stage. I never have done. This is how I handle my life. When I need it, it's there. It's a way of being balanced in this profession, which is a business of excesses. People are always asking me, what is your biggest achievement? I say, being in this business as long as I have, with the success I've had, with my feet on the ground.
Sometimes love is letting go. You've fallen high.
And that's my snapshot of my experience interviewing Suzi Quatro, which I can't say was a dream come true because talking to her was never something I expected would ever happen. You can find the full feature online at undertheradarmag.com, and it is also linked at picturesoflily.com. I also did a review of the documentary for Rock and Roll Globe at rockandrollglobe.com, which is also linked at picturesoflily.com. And you should watch the documentary. You can rent it on YouTube Movies for less than $5, and it's totally worth it. The biopic of Suzi Quatro's life is in the works, and they're already casting for who will play her, and she told me that she has the final say on who that will be, because they have to have her vibe, which, as you'll remember, she said that I did. I asked her what she would do differently if she was trying to come up at the present time, and this is what she said. I don't think anybody's come through this exactly like me. I'm not saying it because I'm anybody special. I'm a one-off. I'm hard to imitate. I would do it the same way because all I'm doing is being me. That doesn't change with time.
Ooh, sometimes love is letting go. And we were flying high. Now I'm lying low in your arms like a stranger.
And that really is my snapshot of interviewing Suzi Quatro.
The truth is plain, but rarely told. You gotta stop saying yes, when you mean no. 'Cause if he's yours,
In the next episode, I am going to talk about my experience interviewing Andy Bell and Vince Clarke of Erasure. Last time I interviewed those guys was about 25 years ago during the early years of my music journalism career, when I didn't know it was my career. And that was for Spin.
Who needs love like that? Who needs love like that?
From myself and my co-producer, director, editor, Lawrence Schroeder, thanks for listening. And once again, if you haven't had a chance to subscribe or follow the podcast on any of the podcast platforms, please do so. And please rate and review. You can connect to us on picturesoflily.com, and from there you can choose your preferred podcast platform or SoundCloud or YouTube or Pandora. You can also find the playlist for the podcast episodes on Spotify and YouTube.
Love like that. Love can turn you upside down, then leave you cold. It's plain to see it losing all calm.
Thanks for listening.
Pictures of living.